Okay, I am so excited to talk to Miles Borrero today, who is, in addition to being an amazing yogi and author, has also been a friend of mine for mm, more than 20 years. Oh my God,
20 did we
four.
did we start grad school in 2000?
We did.
24 years. Wow.
Holy mama. Okay. And there are so many things that I could talk to Miles about. There's so many amazing things, but today we're going to focus on this wonderful book.
Yay.
Yay! Which I read a draft of back in the day, and yay! And full disclosure, had not really sat down and read the final version until Miles, this is not just, to me, this is not just a memoir. I'm like, this is some fucking literature. You got some literature happening here. Like, so many,
Oh,
I was just writing things down. It's like so many beautiful stories, so many important human themes of transformation, of becoming, of connecting, of discarding. It's just, it's a book for everyone to read because it's such a human book. Such a human book.
thank you. Thank you for saying that because I think that that's been hard to like it's been hard to kind of voice what the book is. Not because I didn't know what it was, but because just the world, in terms of the world, like how do you shape it and kind of put it out there, and that was the way it was intended. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely felt that. I like underlined things in your book. I mean, and there's a bunch of things that I want to like a lot of things I'd love to just open up and discuss. But before we do that, I think it's always nice for people to get a little introduction to who you are. So would you
Sure.
mind telling people a little bit about who you are? And of course, that's so many different things, but also make sure to include your yoginess in there, just because.
Well, I was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and I was raised in Bogota, Colombia for until I was like 17 years old. And then I went to school in the United States. I did a BFA in Salt Lake City at the University of Utah for 4 years in acting school. It was kind of a conservatory training within a university. And then for a year, I did like an internship in Minneapolis at a children's theater. That was wild. And then I ended up meeting you at ACT, where we did our MFA for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then I moved to New York with you and all of our um, scallywag actor friends, um, and partly I think the last year of our grad school, when we were in a show called the Ramayana, which is this old Hindu epic tale and poem. It's a very long book. As you might remember, the show was very long. It was 3.5 hours long, and I had done yoga a little bit before. Like I had done, a few times in dance class with Francine, one of our teachers, and I also had gone. My roommate at the time, Allison Schubert, had taken me to a
Mm.
yoga class where Cassandra had laid her back on my back
Oh God.
while I was in downward facing dog, and I was like, "Yes, honey, yes," which is probably not an appropriate thing to say, but I was like, "That feels amazing."
Truth. Yeah.
And that was back when we did adjust like that. And so, I mean, I knew that I enjoyed yoga, but I hadn't really kind of taken it on as a thing. And then when we started doing the Ramayana, I felt like I didn't have the stamina to keep the show going because it was very stylized in
Oh
parts.
yeah.
And there was this one
And
part
you were
specifically.
Hanuman, weren't you Hanuman?
Yeah, I was one of the Vinaras, and so like one of the biggest kind of one of the biggest. Actually, I don't think I was Hanuman. I
No?
was one of the other Vinaras.
In my mind, you were always Hanuman.
I
So
think
that's just what
Ali
I
was
thought.
Hanuman, but we had to.
Right.
You and I were housewives. We're like the wives
I
of the king
remember.
together, and we had to be in Vajrasana and Little Thunderbolt on our shins for like 15 minutes while somebody else told the story, and then we had to stand up at the same time. And I remember my legs would fall asleep And every time I'd be like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to take that step, off this stage?
Mm.
And so there was a place called It's Yoga that was
I
on
went
our
there.
way. Yeah, it was like an old rocket, Ashtanga rocket yoga. The
Yeah.
guy who created rocket yoga, Larry something. And so he was on the way to my house, and I was like, well, I think I'm just gonna walk in there, and I started doing it, and I started doing it maybe like 3 times a week, and then eventually did it
Mm.
more and more and more until I was practicing every day. And then I just kind of never left, like, I mean, my practice has obviously fluctuated throughout the years, but then I just loved it, and it has always since been a part of my ethos and my surroundings.
It's a good companion for all of life's
She is a good companion, yes,
intensities. Um,
totally.
s- so let's talk about your book. So what led to the creation of your beautiful book?
I had a bunch of so when I used to work for when I first started working as a yoga teacher, I was working at a studio called Om Yoga, which was above the Strand bookstore in Union Square in New York City. And it was a giant studio that had like six yoga studios going on at all times of the day. It was like an empire back when yoga studios were like small empires, and it was across the street from Jivamukti.
Yeah.
And the owners used to hate on each other from the windows and be like,
Was that
"Oh,
Cindy Lee or
Jivamukti."
no?
Yeah, and then Cindy
Was
Lee would be
okay.
like, "Oh, Jivamukti," and Jivamukti would be like, "Oh, Cindy Lee," because that's very yogic. And so they would kind of stare at
Ahimsa.
each other from across the window. Yeah. Yeah. And they had like an old rivalry and whatever. And both of those studios no longer exist. But when Ohm kind of went under, I had to I had to go out I mean, I was already working at several places, but I lost sort of like the bulk of my job, and I created a website. And part of that undertaking was that I started to write a blog for my students that was once a month. And I just committed to writing it once a month. And I think I wrote it for something like 14 years, once a month.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and it was just kind of, I felt that in the time that we had in a yoga class, it was hard you could convey you could kind of discuss concepts. If you picked one, you could discuss it in some sort of depth, but really, um, I felt that the philosophical aspects of yoga were hard for students to grasp.
Yeah.
So my thinking behind it was that it was kind of like a yoga meeting like how the philosophy of yoga actually meets like a modern life, and what you can do with this science and this philosophy that is proposed, this code that yoga proposes, and how it can kind of come to work in a world that's moving extremely fast to the point where it's kind of
Mm.
coming off of its hinges, right? And so then my students started saying, "Oh, you should write more," and all this stuff. And I thought about it and thought about it. And eventually, um, I thought, well, what would happen if I put like a little book of essays together, like yogic essays, uh, almost like Rolf Gates's book,
Yeah. Meditations.
Meditations on the Mat or something like that. That's what I was thinking originally. And then at the moment that I started looking at it for reals, I had a breakup, and my dad had passed, and
Mm.
I had kind of started the process of my own transformation, being transgender, and um, because of those things, I think kind of colliding, and the strange moment in time where I suddenly had a lot of space, I started thinking about like looking through those essays and seeing what could go in the book and what not. And then I started realizing this was maybe now like 6 or 7 years ago. I started realizing um, that the story that needed to be told was a different story, because at that time there was very little information about transgender people.
Mm.
I would get a lot of questions from my students. And now, we're kind of in a different problem where there's too much information, and a lot of it is misinformation and information that's extremely
Mm,
harmful toward our community. But
mm.
my book came out in 20 at the end of 2023, so it's only really been out for about a year and some and change. And I think that it's still a good time for it, because
Oh yeah.
it embraces the idea of transformation through, I think, a human. My intention was to embrace an idea of transformation through a human lens, so that
Yeah.
anybody who picks up the book, it really isn't necessary for you to be transgender. Anybody can read it and get something out of it. I think it's was not meant to be didactic, even though it has education in it. It has both yogic education and also gender education in it. But I didn't mean it to be didactic. I really wanted to tell a story uh, of death, um, like loss and love through an artful lens, through the lens of a storyteller. So that's what I did. But I think in the end, it turned into kind of like a synthesis of both my yogic work and how I understand yoga. And I think it also turned into like a place where people can learn something about transgender people if they're interested.
Yeah, I absolutely feel like your book is a and this might I don't know, but it's a book first. It's a book for people first. It's not
Yes,
I wasn't like, oh, this is a trans book. It was like this is
right,
a book, and this is a book about being human and about how we uncover ourselves and how we perceive ourselves and how we're seen by other people and how we see ourselves and how we evolve that and taking courageous steps to dare to transform into the thing we really are. That's for everybody.
right,
It's,
right.
right? I
Right,
was
and
like,
it's really a book about purpose. Like I think in some ways it's a book about one's purpose and being
mm,
integrated. Um, y-
yeah,
you know, uh, yeah, like being integrated with that purpose and integrity, like not in the kind of puritanical sense, but more in the like, you know, the word integrity comes from the word intact in Latin. And I mean, from a wholeness perspective, like us as a whole animal, as a whole human. And that's what was tricky about putting the work out into the world is that it was seen as a trans memoir, which
yeah,
it is, like nobody can
yeah,
argue that. But really, like I pushed for it so much to be marketed as simply a memoir because I feel like the minute that people hear trans memoir, they're like, well, what does that have to do with me? And whatever. Like a lot of it wasn't under my control, but I'm glad that you felt that way, and that
yeah,
is how it was meant. Like a journey of sort of seeing where our humanity meets, not necessarily, and there are probably points where it pulls apart, but really just recognizing that we have a lot more in common than we do um, that separates us.
yeah. Well, and that's also why I think that even though it's like, yes, the book, like that the book is so relevant now, I think the book is particularly relevant now because, as you say, misinformation or misunderstanding or so much fear and so many weird politics right now around the transgender experience. And so this as a humanizing book kind of you go, oh, no, this is a real person. This is a person I relate to. This is a person who's experienced like her complex or his complex family dynamics with family as a youngster and then later in changing and how that has evolved. I mean, it's a human stories to me. So and I
Totally.
think that's super important, especially right now. So
Yes, and that's also why I wanted to, the draft that you read a long time ago was kind of the drafts went through different kind of phases, and eventually the question became, how do we tell the story? Like, where does it begin and where does it end, right? Because my
yeah,
life hasn't ended yet, and any story, things you can tell a story in a million different ways. I mean, we know as being theater people and teachers that how you tell a story is so important and how the student hears it and how it is received. And so for me, there was a draft somewhere in the middle which I don't think you read, which was kind of it was linear because I had to,
Ah,
at the beginning, there was a lot of hopping in time. And then I went and took everything and made it like a linear story because I felt like there were some gaps of things that still needed some working. And then the third draft was we took it and sort of messed with it again in time. Um, and that was important because I felt like I was like, who wants to sit and listen to a story told from the beginning? That's just so boring to me anyway. But then on top of that, I really needed the reader to meet me as an adult in the first pages so that there
mm,
was no doubt that I was of sound mind, that I had a great brain on my shoulders, and so that they could get kind of a feeling like in the first 3 pages of the caliber of human that was speaking to them, so that there wasn't any
mm,
sort of mishigas about that. You know what I mean? So that we could be right on the same page, like, hi, okay, hi. Here
yeah.
we are. This is not like, some, I don't know. This is a person who is well thought out, that they have, they're well studied. You know what I mean? Because I think
Mm,
that also sets the tone for people to be able to listen and hear the story.
yeah. So some of the yes, and for those of you who are listening, um, the book is like magic realism, we might say. So there's storytelling, there's magic, and at the very beginning you say something about this is how it sort of how it feels. It's not like it's not always literal, but the emotional and felt experience is what's conveyed through your writing, which is so beautiful. I mean, it was evocative. I wanted to it was inspirational to me in terms of thinking about what are my missing pieces or where, like, I haven't thought about, okay, you know, who am I? I mean, I think about it all the time, but I it was like a fresh invitation to think about who am I and how do I want to orient myself and where have I discarded pieces or where have I ignored pieces or where am I
Mm,
not listening? And so I found your book very inspirational and an invocation to step into that. So I guess one of my questions might be, what do we need? What kind of tools do we need, or what is helpful on the journey of truly becoming, remembering, integrating ourselves? And that's
mm, mm.
what did it take?
Yeah, I think that's hard to answer because we might all need different things. But
Mhm.
one of the things that's present throughout the book is the breath. Um, like I name it as something like it becomes Soham, which is the Tibetan way the Tibetans, the mantra that they call the breath is Soham. And so I name it quickly in the book, and then it's a phrase that comes, it happens often in the book. And I think because the book has almost ended up kind of coming out as a yoga class, as almost like a very long Dharma talk of a yoga class, maybe one could
Mm,
think of it. And so the breath, the Soham is there pacing the breath, and it's like a bell, or yeah, it's like a bell that kind of brings you back to yourself, I think. And something that's been vital for me in my own exploration is my own, you know, allowing myself to have my breath and just be and through my breath find, I guess, quiet and stillness, because there's so much trash, and we are so overstimulated that I think sometimes it's really hard to sift through all of that and find
mm,
what are we after all of that, stuff that we hear, stuff that comes in. I mean, our nervous system, that has to go somewhere, like it comes in, it comes in, it comes in, and we just can't become like these receptacles that just receive it, receive it, receive it. And I think the breath
mm,
and things like meditation are a way to it's like cleaning out the closet of your mind so that you can be like, oh, that's actually not me, and that's not useful, and that's not me, and that's not useful. And so you can kind of go paring stuff down. Um, those were tools that I've used for a long time that I think kind of really came to like their importance really shown in the creation of the book. But I also think, right, like for anyone, I mean, I also kind of wanted this to be an invitation for anyone to be like, you could like look at your story, write your story, think about your story, think about the things that make you you, write them down. And it's such a great exercise, even if you never publish, even if you don't get very far, even if you just sit down for a moment and think about it, to be able to articulate your own life, because I think in the articulation of it you
Mhm.
find lots of things that echo and mirror, and you start to find perhaps also ways, um I don't know, you start to find the helpers, and you start to find all sorts of things in there that maybe you hadn't really appreciated before, you know.
I have so many things. Okay, so one, and when you're talking about sifting and sifting what's true for you and what's not, I was just reminded of the references that you made to, family trauma or to inherited cultural shame, and how it was like sometimes where you're like, oh, I mistook their shame for my shame, right? And I was just thinking, how, like, is that similar? Like, does that process help you start to go, hey, this, like, what do I actually own here? And what is not mine to carry?
Totally. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember a point like a few years ago, I was chatting with my mom. This was maybe like 2 years ago, and we were talking about generational trauma. And she was like, I don't buy it. And I was like, what? I was like, what don't you buy? And she's like, I don't buy it. Generational trauma. She's like, what does my mother's trauma have to do with me? And I was like, really? You don't see it? Your mom was a rageaholic, and like you don't see the connection on how that's kind of changed your behavior, or that's maybe why you're so afraid of what people think of you, or you know what I mean. And I didn't
Mhm.
say any at the moment. I was kind of like, I don't even know how to address this at the time. But I think yes, I think when you give yourself space to think about things, and when you write them down, then you get a very like um truth has a ring to it. It has like a vibration to it. And when you write it down, you're like, oh, that's not quite right. So you write something else down and you're like, that's not quite right either. And so
Mm.
what was my experience, and I think it really, yes, it was really interesting to go back and be able um to to realize what belonged, what was inherently mine and what wasn't. And I think that's really shifted,
Mhm.
that really has made a change in how I meet the world, because I really don't, I think, carry a lot of shame anymore about being transgender. I actually think it's like a great gift, and I'm super, like, I lead with it. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, obviously it can be dangerous in certain spaces, and I'm not going to put myself in danger for no reason. But I think for the most part, when you're dealing with people who are sweet, kind, and good, like even when they don't know someone who's transgender, or like for example, I've been teaching at Kripalu the last few months at the R&R program, like once a month. And I always try to, at some point in class, say that I'm transgender. I usually don't do it at the beginning because I want them to have this lovely experience. And then at the end to be like, what? That was a transgender who taught the class. Oh my God, can you believe it? And to have to wrestle with their own sort
Yeah.
of biases around that. But I always say it because I think it's such a form of activism,
Yeah.
it's a way in which I can impact the world in a really positive way. When people kind of don't know, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, that was great. And I actually liked it. And that person seemed nice. And, like
Yeah.
that, I think when you can change people's hearts and minds on a topic, even though it's grassroots and it's only one heart and mind at a time, I think it makes a bigger impact, in some
Yeah.
ways. So, yeah,
Yeah. Well, and it's normalizing too. They're like, you mean this cool person that I resonate with and have positive vibe with and give me this great experience is not what I thought. Is like this other this thing that was other doesn't seem so other anymore. And then
right,
it's,
right. And then they're
yeah,
like, wow, I had a nice time with this person and I even got on their mailing list, or whatever. But it's
yeah,
like that. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's yeah. Um, so actually I have I was so excited when you wrote this and I wanted to ask you about this. So many things. Okay. Okay. Because I struggle with this conundrum all the time and you articulate it so well and it's so because it's a gender issue it's so just front and center but I think we all struggle with this. You say on page 146. I'll just read it
I'm
out
with you.
loud
Okay.
too. Okay. For this mantra, this is you're coming back to your mantra, I am not the body, I'm not the mind, I am something divine. This mantra holds one of the most impossible, confusing riddles of my life. On the one hand, it says, I am worthy, as is divine. On the other, if I am enough, why do I feel like I need to change something essential about myself, especially something material? And then you kind of scroll down. If this body is truly just a rental for this lifetime, then what does my biology matter? And I feel like this is just like the ultimate yogic paradox. Like I have this desire to change, and yet my essential nature is supposedly perfect and whole. How do we navigate that? How did you
Yeah, I mean,
navigate that?
and that was really stressful, bit of wisdom there for me because on the one hand, like when it came to me, it's kind of like this idea that you are enough. And we hear that. That's like
Yeah,
yogic cereal box wisdom, right? It's like you are enough.
platitude a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me know that. But for me, because I came from a very harsh Catholic kind of background, where like sinning was really, like being a sinner was really the thing. And so for me, hearing as a 20 something, that I was enough was really like because I was starting to tackle with this conundrum of being transgender too at that time. It was like, wow, really? I'm enough. So for a while, that was all I needed. It felt like this cold water spring, that I could just dive into. And I was like, oh my gosh, everything's okay because I'm enough. But then as I kind of continued and I started to feel that I need to make other changes, that enoughness started to feel like a binding space because I was like, well, wait, if I'm enough, then why do I need to change something that might not be, you know, that is material? Like, why do I need to change my body? Like, how do I reconcile changing my body? And I don't really know like. How to make sense of that for ourselves other than I think the change is a constant thing. And the truth of it is that we are always changing our bodies with the way we eat, with the way that we, live, with the way that we wear them, and with the way that we use them out in the world. Um, and I think to me, it comes down to there's this quote that I read the other day that I think really kind of like exemplifies this really beautifully. Oh, I can't believe I found it this quickly. It's a quote by Julian K. Jarboe, and it says, God blessed me by making me transsexual for the same reason he made wheat but not bread and fruit but not wine, because he
Ooh.
wants humanity to share in the act of creation.
Ooh.
So, in some ways, I think it's that, it's not about not changing. It's about like it has
Mm.
more to do with your dharma, your purpose, and like you're always going to change. So how do you change in with your purpose as a north? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think that it has more to do with it. It's sort of like the you're always going to change. So really, what is the alchemy of the change that you want to call in? It's not about being enough. Is not about a static position. It's kind of like balance. Balance is a
Mm,
thing that happens. It's a second in time. It's not like an actual. It's not a landing strip. It's not that because you have half moon pose today, all the times after this you're going to be half mooning, like a rock. Like you're not ever going to fall out of your balance is half moon happens today right now, and it doesn't happen today right now, and then it happens again, and it's like it's falling off balance and catching your balance. And so in some ways it has more to do with being enough is is meeting yourself in the moment of enoughness. It's like it's not a place, it's not a still point you arrive at. it's
mm,
a it's a continuum that you're always like that has to do with you meeting the outer world, and kind of like that dance of readjustment all the time, I think.
mm. That reminds me of of something that Harish Wallace, who's a tantric teacher that I follow, was saying.
Yeah, I
And
love
I
Harish.
yeah, me too. So I'm forgive me if I'm paraphrasing this badly, guys. Go check out Harish and listen to his stuff. It's amazing. But it was something about like the impulse. Like he's like, it is the paradox. It's like the impulse to change is also part of this moment of wholeness and perfection. Like that impulse is part
Right,
of your becoming and your aliveness and your embodiment. So it's not like you just stuff it, right? Which is what the idea is. Like
right.
I'm enough as is. I hate and these. There's a he has a really nice book called what is it called? I was going to say An Inconvenient Truth, but that is not true. That is Al Gore. It's like Truth or Consequences. Nope, that's a town. Anyways, it's about near enemies of the truth. That's what it's called. And I am enough. And some
Yes.
of those things are just sort of like these they point in a direction, but when you just take them at their superficial face value, they actually don't lead you to the riches of the depths of that idea. And this idea of I am enough can become this placeholder of I don't need to change or my shit is fine as it is. And then we cut ourselves off from listening to that intuition and the wisdom that's like actually, you know, just part of it. So
Right, right. And life, I mean, like y- plants keep growing, and life keeps,
yeah.
somebody passes and life keeps happening around you. And so, I mean, I think that there are all these instances where, um, not changing is not really an option. Like you can talk yourself into it, but that's just not the reality of how the world works.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's really more a koan or a riddle of stillness and motion. It's like how do we embrace the lull as we find equanimity? It's not finding equanimity and stepping off of the lull.
Mm.
It's not like running into the cave to leave the material world, because we are still of the material world, or at least for me, that's how I've made sense of it. Because when I've gone to India and I've seen people living in caves doing the thing, I'm like, well, that's cool, but I don't really want to do that. Like, I'm not called to do that. And I also like, I feel like that's kind of, I'm like, well, that's all
Pete?
great, but it's like you're cheating, dude. Like, I'm like,
I
try
know.
to try to meditate in the middle of Times Square. I dare ya. Like it's like, and I know that that's not. I mean, that has nothing to do with, that's more like how I can understand these teachings with the things that I care about in this world, and with the things that I want to move forward in this world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not so
Yeah.
much a judgment on them. It's really a mirror of, well, what am I doing here? What is my
Yeah.
purpose?
Well, being in relationship, I mean, and I'm not saying this like, oh, well, I could totally do the cave thing. So now I'm moving on to the higher realm of being in relationship. That's not true. I go batshit
You
crazy in a
might be
cave.
able to. You've lived it for a year in an RV. I think the cave thing
That's
is like
true.
is a little closer to that than
Then, you know
you.
what's
You and Gil
funny?
might be like cave dwellers next year.
He would love that. He's so funny. Gil, I think, in all of his past lives, has been a monk. He's like just been a monk for like generations. And so for
That does
him,
not
this
surprise me.
right? In this lifetime, he's actually like It's like that would be he went to a retreat once or something like that, and he was like, "Oh, this is super easy. I could just do this. It's super easy. What's hard is like having a family. What's hard is having kids. What's hard is
Mm.
being in the world." So for him, and again, I don't know that I could do the cave that well, but but I'm in relationship, and to me, the ground of relationship is me working out my spiritual, like chewing on my spiritual food or whatever. It's like that's where the work is for me. And sometimes that's relationship with myself. I treat myself like shit sometimes, and then I'm nice to myself at other times and trying to figure out what that looks like and hmm, how to just healthfully without denial let go of certain things in the past or grieve certain things in the past in order to be more present and alive and hopefully awake and in connection now. And I mean, that's going to take me lifetime. So like,
Seriously, I
that's the
mean
work.
that's it, right? I mean, yoga, yoking. I think you could just as easily translate that word to mean relationship, right? Or bind or bridge or however you want to translate it. And I think that's the nut that's the thing. It's like, how do we relate to whatever it is that we are relating to in our lives, whether it's other people, whether it's the aminals, whether it's like, like our ourselves, our actual like love relationships, it's
Yeah.
like it's all those little like threads. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear all of that.
And there's something too in your story, as we go through. There are several different moments of being seen for who you are, and sometimes I think it's being seen for who we don't even know we are. Like someone sees something in us, and we didn't even know one that could be seen or that we were allowed to have that seen. And all these beautiful moments. Which just reminded me of like the power of finding good community for our own
Oh my
growth,
gosh. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
like
those
you're
moments are so powerful, like I also don't feel like you have to be transgendered. Like I feel like everybody, if you were to ask
yeah,
anybody, and that's kind of the value of telling your own story, even if it's to yourself, is finding those little points of value, you know what I mean, that I think other people would never give your story necessarily or whatever, but you finding the meaning in those moments where it's like, oh my gosh, like this moment where somebody saw something in me. And I think we all have those moments where it's like, like our English teacher saw that we could write, or our singing teacher saw that we could sing, or like somebody was like, hey, you're pretty good on that guitar, whether it's true or not. You know what I mean? It doesn't so much matter. It's like, I don't know. Like I feel like in some ways, and correct me if I'm wrong, that yoga did this for you in some ways because
mm,
the you that I knew in grad school was somebody that was extremely contained and sort of in some ways like you were kind of being pushed into a very different box there. And it seems like yoga
mm.
has afforded you some freedom for all of your other like I think you're a lot wilder than our grad school could even
Mm,
like absorb, and I feel like yoga has given you a broader playing space for to have
mm,
your operatic singing voice and to have like your to be a lot more like I don't know, more intrinsically yourself. And I've really
yeah.
appreciated watching that, these last,
Oh,
I guess, 20 years since we've left grad school, and watching that bud. But I don't know. I mean, that's just something
oh,
that I've kind of noticed.
I
What do you
love
think about
hearing
that?
that. I love hearing that, especially because I mean, I gotta be honest, the last few years have felt a little bit more worky. And so
Mm,
there's part of me that's longing, hey, Miles, my harmonium, I'm gonna get you to tell me how to do that
yes, honey.
harmonium.
Yes, mine is over there. We
Yes.
can we can our
Woo.
harmoniums can make out. Yeah, totally.
But I love hearing that. I think that for me and many people, I don't think this is unusual, but in yoga, what I found was when I was acting and in theater, well, so I love the story of how you left acting too, and how you told off, who, the agent who I think we both know. Anyways, but there's
Oh
this
my
this
gosh, yes, you know her actual name. Don't
I
say it out
do.
loud, but yes.
I won't say it out loud. Oh, but the toxicity of the acting world, at least my experience of it, and the like that I felt so little actually, even though they want you. want you to be big and expansive and like be full of power and confidence, and they secretly want you to be like, fuck you, I don't care about this job. And yet at the same time, it's like so filled with desperation and self-consciousness. And when I came over to yoga and started doing more yoga, I thought, oh my God, I can actually say my truth in this space. I can actually
Right.
speak to something that's real. I mean, I love and theater at its true form and at its heart. I love it because I do feel like it shares truth, just like any really wonderful
Absolutely.
storytelling. But I felt like in the yoga world, I could actually speak from my own experience and from who I am in a way, and talk about whatever I really wanted to talk about it, and talk about like trans our own processes. Like I'm also, as you know, I like love yoga philosophy and how does that intersect with how we live. And I found that so much more nourishing than acting.
Totally, totally. But I think that's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like that space where you can leave the performance. And, it's like, why do so many people come to their first yoga class and start crying? It's because in some ways there's
Yeah.
an invitation in that space for you to allow your animal body to settle, and to be like, put your bones down and kind of see what happens when you do that. And that's an emotional experience for a lot of people. I hear everything
Yeah.
that you're saying, and I had that same experience. I have had that same experience over and over and over in yoga, which is really encouraging and lovely.
Yeah. It is what I love about yoga too is that I always teach what I'm working on. So invariably it's so simple. It's like get in your body, get in your body, get in your body. And like just start just if we could only do that, if we could only just go, oh my God, ooh,
Just start. Yeah, just
that's
start.
it.
That's all you need to do is just take the first step. Yeah, totally. Totally.
Let's talk
Yeah.
about can we talk about your chanting and just how chanting
Yeah,
has been a part of
absolutely.
your world? Tell us how you got into that.
I got into it. I walked into a yoga class. I was already a yoga teacher. I walked into a yoga class. There was like this big tatted up dude at the front of class with a little wood box. And he started chanting. And I was like, what the fuck is happening? And, in that first class, actually, I was walking into a class that was very well attended by many, many teachers in town, and that like was already had a steady following, so everybody knew the chant, and I did not. And there was just like this. It was just incredible to hear him sing, and then for this room of people to be singing in Sanskrit and not singing well.
I
I know that sounds like I'm being
love
a
it.
bit of a dick, but I actually
Mm.
I mean it in the best way possible. Like it was so beautiful to hear that sound because I felt like it was like it wasn't I had come from a place where it was like actors singing, or whatever, and it's like and we there was um a high kind of price point of our pride to sound good, and there was nothing of the sort in this class. It was like 40 plus people who didn't necessarily need to or want to or worry about sounding good. And there was something, again, the
Mm.
performance of it was not the practice, right? The practice was the actual like chewing on the sounds and feeling the vibration in your body. And I just felt it so deeply inside my person. It really kind of opened up something. And because I had been a singer all my life, like this love of singing, I was like, wait, I can teach and this can be a part of my teaching. It really kind of excited me. And then I started kind of diving into all of the things about it and learning more about it. And I'm not classically trained or anything. And I've learned, I mean, I've learned as much as I have over the years about sound and whatever, but it just is such an immediate way right into the like it surpasses all bullshit and all stories and goes right to the quick. And there was a time when after that, many years after that, I had a motorcycle accident and I couldn't I couldn't practice for a
Mm,
very long time. I was still teaching because I couldn't not teach, but I couldn't practice for a very long time because my collarbone was shattered. And
mm,
um, I kept sing. I like singing became the mantra practice became almost like the most physical thing I could do at the time, and it's really just become
mm.
this practice that has held me together always, you know. And it's been such a I don't know, there's just something about it that really just it I have this friend that jokes that you could chant mantra for an hour, do asana practice for 100 hours, and you get the same effects, you know.
Yeah.
And I really have grown I mean, it's a very funny yogic joke, and I think it's very precise. Like it's sort of like that, you know, like that's become really it is because even down to it, even if you take the mantra out, even if you're just breathing, the sound of the breath has a mantra. So it's like
Mm.
you cannot escape mantra. Like we are mantra in practice, we are mantra in motion. And so that makes me really excited, you know, and like now that I understand sort of the physiology of what happens and the science of like, you know, like how we are really all sound, but you know, we're like different I guess textures of sound. Like if we're more dense, then we have less like finer vibration. And if we're more less dense, then we have vibration that can kind of ululate a little bit more. But I get really I can geek out on that shit for a long time, you know? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's so
it
good. And
really
how
makes
is
me
your
happy.
voice feeling? Because you've gone through this a whole journey with your voice. And so how
That's
is it
been
chanting
wild.
now? Yeah.
Uh it's still it's much better. Like I'm starting to be able to sing again in a way that feels like I'm not like a cat in heat, you know. And I've been playing the piano for the last 8 months. Like I'm learning
Yeah.
music theory. I'm learning actually how to play the piano like for reals with a teacher and stuff. And that's really giving
Awesome.
me a lot of having the piano to reverberate my voice again is really I think really doing a lot of healing as far as like reteaching me how to use this instrument because it's so different. It's so you would think that we know how to sing, like fine, your voice will drop and you'll figure it out because you know how to sing. It's totally different. The kind of it's almost like the larynx and the soft palate have to move in different directions to get things to go. And now that I can figure that out, I feel like I'm getting closer to like being just in a really sweet place. And some days are really sweet and some days are still rough, but mostly sweet, you know? It's been like an evolution and that's been actually kind of great because it's almost like that was the thing that I was most afraid of, or one of the things that I was most afraid of in transitioning, of letting go of. It felt like the last thing, you know, that was
Yeah.
kind of like me. And it was really scary, but eventually the
Yeah.
need was such that I was like, well, whatever happens, happens. And, you know, now that I'm on this side, I'm like, oh, it it's beautiful. You know, it's beautiful to let
Mm,
go of that last
mm,
like it's kind of brought me into a more humble space with it. And I feel like I've really had to navigate some
mm.
really horrible sounds. So like I have a lot more, you know, like I'm like any
Yeah.
injury, it has made me so much more compassionate toward my students and toward the fear of like what's in here and you know, opening their own throats.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I wrote down Ariel, like the mermaid. When in
oh
that part in your
yes.
book, I was like, who sacrificed her voice in order to take her journey.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
And that's how it felt. You know, it felt like it was
Yeah.
like, okay, like here we go. Ah, you know, it's like it's like here we go. And, you know, like and then it reminds me that it's kind of like there's no sacrifice in life that we can't make, that we can't that isn't like teachings sometimes come really hard and they're always great teachings. You know, it's like there's
Mm.
no, I don't know, like I feel like even if I had lost that, like it wouldn't have depleted, it wouldn't have made my worth any less in the world, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Oh, there's so many things. Oh, let me ask you what. Let me ask you. I know I have like you wouldn't believe all the notes I took. You guys, I'm
I
just
love
gonna have to.
it. That's
People
the
out
highest
there,
honor.
you're just you're just gonna have to go out and get his book. Okay, so that's the bottom line here. But I will ask you. Oh, just I guess one little last thing. Who are the? Tell me about the ancients.
The ancients. The ancients are the energies that exist in our sphere that are they're like our wisdom and our intuition and in the book they're kind of like I guess my ancestors in some ways that I never knew. And but I think they're like the wind of the energy that pulls us forward, when we are kind of at a loss and we have to listen to something else than just ourselves. They're the whispers in the wind that tell
Mm,
us, like take a step forward, we'll catch you, or um, I
mm,
don't know. They're like our backup, They're like our entourage that we don't really acknowledge are there, but I
mm.
think they're there for a lot of us. I mean, or most of us. I'm a craniosacral therapist as well, and part of that lineage, or the lineage that I come from there, really listens to kind of the energies that are in the room, and it's rare that somebody comes into the room and doesn't have helpers and people
Yeah.
that are, or like energies that are there sort of aiding them. And so like I think if we listen, there's just a lot more that's helping us. It's like
Mm,
somebody said to me once, like, what would happen if you believe instead that life is fighting for you, or that life is working for you, like that whatever, like, so I was just stuck in the Atlanta airport for 3 days, and it was kind of a harrowing experience. That instead of thinking that that was like a life-ending experience, like what maybe it was rescuing me from something else, or maybe like I
mm,
needed that in order to, so like even the bad stuff,
mm.
that the life is actually helping us even when it seems bad. um, I don't know. There's something to
Yeah.
that. Like, what if the universe were vying for us and not against us?
It certainly shifts how we are able to be in each moment, even like regardless of whether that's true. I mean, we believe what's true based on like we have lots of reasons for our sets of beliefs that we have, but it's like why not choose to believe something that is actually so much more forward moving and beneficial? Why not choose to believe that? It gives, I
And
think
you
there's
can
so much
choose,
value
and you can
there.
choose, and it
Yeah.
and it changes. Like choose making those little choices changes our perspective. Which again,
Yeah.
coming back to your first question of writing the book, and the benefits of writing the book is that again, when you write your story down, you start to have to choose how you tell your story. And for example, in the retelling of mine, I wanted it to be a positive retelling, and I didn't want to throw anybody under the bus. I mean, I still wanted to be honest about the things that happened, but I wanted to tell it from a place of love. And whenever that like wasn't happening, I was like, well, those sentences do not have to be in the, I have to find a different way,
Mm,
because that's not coming from love. And that was like a guiding post, for me. And I think the ancients kind of were helping with that as well. It's like, well, how do I tell this story lovingly? And my feeling about it, like when I look back and I kind of like I sit with it, is that, the some of the ancients that I speak of in this book that have passed from my family, some of them are actually feel grateful to have inquiries into their stories that were compassionate, and wondered what other things could be happening with them.
mm. All right. Do we have time for one more question? I do have one more
Of
question.
course.
Okay. Um, this is just something that struck me that I really loved because I feel like, I mean, and yeah, anyway, so I'm just going to read it to you. This is from I'm going to read your own book to you. It's from page 201. Um, and you mentioned it. Yeah, anyway, so this is moving a little bit more into gender questions, which is you said, I'm not abandoning my womanhood, rather, I'm expanding its container to allow for my masculinity. And then you say, I'm not becoming a man, I am becoming myself, the gender expression of which might appear more masculine, but the gender experience of which is still TBD. Right. So, and part of that was, about uh, feminism and things like that. But I loved the sense that like gender identity, like when I think of gender identity, it can feel very, I don't know, it can feel like a story that's not always useful, right? Like this is what a woman is. This is what a man is. Like it's like where did those ideas come from? And your expression here of actually no, you're just expanding who you are to be who you are. Could you speak to, I think you actually talk about, you say sort of at some point like the lie of gender. Could you speak a little
Mm.
bit more about what that means?
Well, I think you're right. I think that gender is the gender binary that we have grown up with is a very narrow definition of uh, of a person that doesn't even that that really boxes out most of us, I think, in who we are, who we naturally are. Um, and I think it hurts all of us, and you could say, well, it doesn't hurt the patriarchy, right now is in vogue. And so like it doesn't hurt your white men, you know what I mean? But I would argue to say that it does, because who has been creating the mass shootings of the last 10 years? Like, look at the statistics there. Like, it is white lonely men. Why are they lonely? Because their masculinity has entrapped them into this box where they don't know how to feel their feelings, they don't know how to articulate their feelings, they don't know how to connect to other people. It makes them angry, and so they go out and they shoot people. I mean, obviously that's a very probably broad and whatever gross synthesis of the thing. But the thing is, the gender binary hurts all of us. Like, I think that um, people like me are not. Uh, we're not we're not fighting, we're not vying to take away, we're not vying to become the next white dude. You know what I mean? Like, we're just, all we're vying for is for everybody, for you and for me and for everybody who's listening, to have that extra little bit of space where if they have something that doesn't quite fit into those binaries, which I'm pretty sure everybody will encounter at some point in their life. Either they were like the boy who had too many feelings, or they were the boy who liked to paint his nails, or they were the girl who, wanted to play with the boys and get dirty, or they were the girl who didn't always want to be nice, or you know what I mean? Like, whatever those things are, I think they bind all of it. They have become such a cloak over all of us that is really, I think, the reason why all this toxicity is alive. It's kind of the answer of how we're treating our planet, and why, and like, I think so many of the answers to our problems would be in allowing a little bit more room for people to exist. Then there wouldn't be all this like heat that's created from that. And
Right.
um, I think it would really undo a lot of the very serious problems that we're finding ourselves navigating, and it
Mm,
also would create a world where men would feel worthy enough and lovable enough, that they wouldn't have to oppress their wives, their sisters, their mothers, and take away their bodily autonomy. You know what I mean?
mm,
I just feel like I feel like there's another way. Um, And honestly, like I had those of you listening don't know, but I had the privilege, the great privilege of being in Rachel and Gil's light as they came through
Mm.
town on the Nerve tour, and I was struck by Gil's presence and how he has clearly, effortfully cultivated um, himself to be a wider spectrum than just what is expected of a man. And every
Mm.
time I meet that in the world, I am so grateful to those men because they carry the torch for other men. And but I think that
Mm.
that is the thing. It's like that is where toxicity kind of starts and ends. And that's where we can, I think, if we let go of those strictures that narrow the binary, um, I think we'll only find freedom. And honestly, like, what is the big deal? Like, if you allow me to be me in the world, like, what is it taking from you? It's not really
Yeah.
taking anything from anybody. Like, um, if anything, like, you'll find that it's probably like those very narrow standards are hurting you as much as they are hurting me, you know?
It reminds me a little bit of just speaking about cultural shame, cultural trauma, inherited identities. I mean, Gil, Integral Anatomy has one of the fundamental tenets of it is start with the individual. And I feel like that's just like, there you are. Whatever, like whoever you meet, start with them. Just start with them. And that clears away all of these things of like, oh, I want to put you in a box. You're a man, therefore you have all these, Gil would say this is left brain blindness. You have all these inherited characteristics that
Right.
make you male. Like, however, or you're black, or you're white, or you're a yogi, or you're an economist, or all of those things that we map one level of meaning to, and gender is just huge for that. We've inherited so many ideas around that. Instead, if we can try to take people out of the box of our own expectations and just say, like, who are you? So, like, just start with a fresh
Right.
slate.
It's
And
like
that's so hard.
an open-ended question. And Gil wouldn't be able to do his job if he made too many assumptions about a body when encountering a body, he would not be able to do his job. The window, like his glasses would be hazy or dirty, right? It's like
Yeah.
in some ways, like doing that, starting fresh is cleaning the glasses so that then you can be like, okay, I have a body, what is happening with this body? But if you're already like, I
Yeah.
have a body, it's 53 years old, it's like, and you're making all these assumptions about it.
Yeah.
Once you go into it, you're going to miss that their, I don't know, appendix is slightly to the left. How curious. Or like whatever it is that you see in there that might be different, you may miss because you're already looking for likeness as opposed to, you know what I mean? And instead, I love that. It's like, who are you? Like, what a great, like, shouldn't we all start with that with each other? You know
Simple.
what I mean? Yeah.
Right? Yeah, and
Yeah.
I
That's
think that
beautiful.
that comes back to just like yoga teachings of what's the purpose of yoga teachings. One of my first teachers, Alan Finger, used to talk
I
about,
know, Alan.
what yeah, so one of the things that we're doing, it's like we go through the world like you're in a dirty car and your windshield is covered with all of your habitual conditioned expectations. And part of our practice is to actually clear away the mind's tendency to label and dissect and organize everything and actually just feel the what is, which is
Mm,
this is a perfect practice. Can we do that with also not just with others, but the more we can do that with others, maybe we can do that with ourselves and these self-limiting beliefs we don't even, or identities that we don't even know that we're carrying around with us. It's like, how can we,
totally. And
right?
how awesome would it be if as children, like I think like I grew up in a culture that was very, very fixed and so rigid around certain things. And it's like you should act this way
Yeah.
and this way. And for example, my grandmother had a piano at her house, and I would sit on the bench of the piano and she'd be like, "Don't touch it." And I was, and now I'm like 47 years old and I'm learning how to play a piano that somebody gifted me because they didn't want to haul it across New York, right? And and I have my own piano, and I'm sitting there wondering what would have happened if my grandmother, instead of saying "Don't touch it," had been like, "This is a piano, open it, and then tinker with it, and whatever." And it's like just like that we also have, and I'm coming back to like a scene in the book where I think it's my mom, or I don't know how it ended up being written, but my mom notices, like because her oven was falling apart, and with
Oh yeah.
I noticed what was happening and I fixed it rather quickly. And she like notices this thing that has always been with me, that I somehow understand how to speak machine. Um, and it's like that's such a small thing, but it's such a big thing, because um, it's something that never kind of was appreciated, and yet it's always been there. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes there are many of us, like this hasn't been the case for me, but I know many people who have a hard time like being like, well, what is my purpose? And I believe that we all have a purpose. We're all here for a reason, and we all have gifts that aid that reason along. But I think sometimes the reason why people have a hard time um, kind of landing or finding their way toward their purpose is because they've been so estranged from the things that are already working really well inside of them. And I'm not saying that we don't have to educate ourselves and learn more and become better to be able to do these things really well in the world. But I do think that there's a spark, and maybe like if your spark was being a shoemaker and like, I don't know. Yeah, and nobody was really like, and people were like, well, that's not a job that you would ever want, then you never became
Yeah.
a shoemaker. And so then you have to kind of catch up to it the rest of your life. But some of those, what are those skills that would make you a good shoemaker? Is it like the way that you envision things in a 3D form? Like, and all those things are things that the world needs in some incarnation.
Mm-hmm. It's like getting better at listening to the like hearing your guides whisper to you, listening to your own inner whispers, maybe taking the like, well, like if I did take those limiting beliefs off, what would actually be emerging? Can I what's actually there? I mean, that's good soul food and good spiritual work for all of us to do.
Oh, totally. And
Oof.
I think, like even like beginner yoga teachers, and I wouldn't even say beginner, it's like I stand up in front of a class 3 times a week now in person. And sometimes I'm like, what do I have to offer? And it's like, well, and then it's kind of like, well, I have to offer me. And this is, like whatever is alive for me right now is going to be alive for somebody else right now. And if I can just tap into that and allow it to
Mm.
exist, then people are going to feel that in the space.
Yeah. Oh, well, I love you.
I
Um,
love you so much.
so again, this is your beautiful book, and I'll put links to it, obviously. But where can people find your book and where can people find you if they want to hang out with you?
Yes, they can find my book on my website. They can find it also on the Amazons, even though they're the devil. And if you want to get more granular about it, we can, but it's because queer books are very hard to get out. So a lot of bookstores are not carrying it, but you can ask your bookstore for it and they might be able to get it. I would prefer you buy from indie bookstores, but anyway, unfortunately, the structures are what they are. So don't kill the messenger. It's on Amazon. If you need it by tomorrow, they can get it to you. If you want to wait 3 weeks and can, then an indie bookstore, or I can send it to you. And then you can find me at milesyoga.com. And I have all sorts of offerings. I'm still teaching on Zoom some. I teach in New York City 3 times a week. I also do workshops, and I'm going to be in Ray's teacher training coming up with Mel, which I'm really excited about. That's going to be amazing. We're going to basically uh, take all the things we talked about with mantra and go way deeper into that. So that's going to be super fun. Um, and yeah, you can find me. And I also am doing a retreat in Portugal this May. It's the last weekend of May where we're going to be town hopping on a bicycle around 3 different towns in Portugal. And we're going to start, Ray, at the what is it called? The Cathedral of Bones in Évora, which is this amazing place that was constructed out of human bones.
No.
Yes, and it's
Oh my
really
gosh.
beautiful, and it's actually art. Like
Oh,
the architecture is created with complete knowledge of the human body. So like the way that the bones are displayed and stacked and created. It's like it's really like mind blowing. And when you walk in there, it sounds like a sound studio. It's so quiet because of the I think the density of the bones creates this space that's like very like it has that same like a sound studio. It's beautiful.
Wow, that is crazy. I
Yeah.
totally want to check that out. Um, Miles,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much for spending time with me today and with us today. I hope that this talk is as it's your book has so inspired me, and I hope that this helps to share that light just a little bit further. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a delight. I could talk to you all day.